All right, so next we are going to talk about attention without consciousness evidence in healthy normal subjects. So first experiment I'm going to talk about is this study by Loskirch, published in 2012. So it's a relatively recent study. And here what they did was asking people to do the visual search, okay? So the subject's task is to look for this object. It's called a Gabor patch in study of psychophysics. It's oriented, black and gray white kind of stripe in one of the location of this patch. But one important thing of this visual search experiment is to make this target actually invisible to the subject, which sounds really strange, but it's possible to do. So the way they did it was to use this continuous flash suppression method that I discovered when I was a grad student and then discussed a little bit in a couple of weeks ago. So here they present the stimulus to one eye, typically here non-dominant eye, maybe most of the time left eye for most of you, and then project a different stimulus to the dominant eye, right eye, using the mirrors. Let's say if you have an filter for red and green, like 3D theater like situation and so on, you can do something like this. And then in particular, what they did was for presenting this target for 1 second, but at the same time, for this 1 second of the time, they presented what's called Mondrian mask. That is a high contrast and edge rich and colorful and so on to the dominant eye. Then as a result of this, flashing of this, each of the stimulus, usually this is flashed at every 100 milliseconds or so. So over one second, you see tens of the patterns like this, which is completely random. And then most likely the dominant eye and its corresponding retinal neuron and LGN and B1 neurons responding to the input from dominant eye gets activated every time there is this new input coming in. It can create a very effective suppression, flash induced suppression on this side. And that's why it's called continuous flash suppression. And all you see consciously is this one, okay? And then you can imagine that you are asked to search for this Gabor pattern, but because of this flashing thing, you just can't see it. And that's a really weird kind of situation, but this is similar to the situation of the blind sighted patient. They say that, oh, I don't see it, but you are, as an experiment, you ask them, there will be some stimulus and you try to look for it, or just respond as fast as you can. And then if you are still a subject, you are like, yeah, okay, I'll try. But most of the time you just don't see it. Okay, so that's how they did this experiment. And then after that 1 second elapsed, they presented this random pattern to both eyes to remove the possibility of the after image. And then right after each trial, they asked subject to do the for 0.5 seconds there is a blank, and then after that they asked where was a pattern or not. So it's like a detection kind of response. And then how sure are you, coming from, the confidence rating from 1 to 4. And then after that, they ask also which spatial location or spatial orientation. In this case, it is to the right oriented or left oriented Gabor patch they need to report. Okay, so, and then these 3 questions are the assessment of conscious experience, basically. Then what they found was that they looked at so by the way, it is very important to say that during this experiment, subjects were also monitored in their eye movements. So not only this, complicated, left and right eye separate stimulation, they also recorded eye movements where the subject is actually looking at very carefully. And then by doing so, they were able to find that even though they don't see it, these targets or not, when they separated the trial into the stimulus area versus control area, and then they found that the percentage of the time that your eyes are around the location of the target is significantly higher than the location where you don't have the target. Of course, if this is completely visible situation, then the dwell time would be like 100% for the stimulus area and 0% for the control area, most likely. However, because this is an invisible situation and all you see is this flickering pattern, it's still surprising that your eyes go to the target, in fact. And then, so this is a measurement of the attention, okay, or a proxy of the attentional processing. On the other hand, the three questions that they asked using this, analyzing all the only trials in which participants were very unsure regarding the stimulus location. So this is based on the confidence rating after each trial. They looked at that, and then location and orientation discrimination was at chance level, 50% as a chance, okay, around 50%. So in terms of conscious experience or conscious reports, they just can't tell where the things are or what kind of things they were, but your eyes kind of knew it. So that's the sort of the surprise of this experiment. And this was published in Current Biology, one of the highest journals in the field. And this is quite a convincing demonstration that attentional or eye movement kind of processing can happen without conscious experience. So what does this mean? And the first thing is that subjects try to search for a target on the CFS, meaning that it's this invisible target. Okay, and in trial, subject denies seeing conscious stimulus. Still, attentional measure, eyes movement are going there. So this case is that overt spatial attention equal eye movements were guided towards the target based on this invisible target. And also, it is also important to note that this is there is some kind of parallel, potential parallel with the blind side situation. Not only the phenomenology, but also potential anatomy. This is again coming back to the diagram of the blind side explanation. But you know that even within this healthy subject anatomical schema here, speria colliculus is here, and then goes to pulvinar, and then goes to B5 or other higher areas, and that part is more the same with blind side patient, right? So it is plausible that using continuous flash suppression, we can knock out the process around here within the normal subject, and then induce the residual function of the speria colliculus or pulvinar to higher visual areas, and that is especially effective in terms of driving overt eye movements or covert shift of attention, and it demonstrates attention without consciousness. So next, the last demonstration in the normal subject is at the level of behavior using the verbal reports and also detection task, as well as eye movements during the visual search. And now we wanted to look at what's a possible neural mechanism, looking at the neuroimaging technique, functional MRI. So here, Bahadur Bahrami, in use at the time England, did the following experiment. So this one again used a continuous flash suppression, and then and it was published in 2007. So it was right 2 years after we published CFS paper. So what he did was, again, he presented a dominant and also non-dominant eye, different type of the image. Okay, and then the first thing to note is that continuous flash suppression happens on these 4 quadrants. Okay, and then it's again flashed at 100 milliseconds or something like that. And then subject basically sees only these meaningless patterns, edge-rich, contrast high patterns. And then to the non-dominant eye, corresponding location, including this part and then this part, had done line drawings of the objects. And then this was, although you may not see anything here, top right and the bottom left, it is actually a scrambled version of the line drawing is presented here. So that the hope is that amount of the lines or contrast is more or less equated with respect to these line drawings, so that at least RE visual areas would be activated more or less equally. Okay, and then the as I said, the conscious perception wise, what you see is to the right side, but your right eye and the left eye sees completely different things. And then up to V1 layer 4, these are, the left side is definitely processed, and after that there is some kind of suppression going on, and then you don't see it. Okay, and then the other important component of this experiment is this attentional manipulation. So as you can see in the center of the display, to the both eyes, they presented this letter, roughly 1 degree, letter. It's, as the size of your fingernail at the arm's length. And this changes in its color and also the identity over the time, like this way, W, N, T, Z, Z, T, W, and so on. Okay, and then what Bahadur did is to ask subjects to report or count the number of the occurrence of the target during this fMRI experiment. So here, the low load condition corresponds to, in this case, subject actually press the button, sorry. And then whenever they found the letter T, regardless of whether it is black or white. So it's a low load task because you don't need to pay attention to the conjunction of the feature between the color and the letter identity. So regardless of the letter, whenever they see the T, then they just press a button. Okay, it's relatively easy, as you will see. On the other hand, in the high load situation, Bahadur asked people to respond either white N, like this, or black Z. And the white N and Z are rotation sort of symmetric. So it's you need to pay special attention to make a conjunction response. It is a demanding task in a sense. Okay. So that's attentional manipulation. Okay. And then what they found. First, all of these experiments is important to verify from the behavioral manipulation. So the location accuracy wise. So they asked subjects to see whether the stimulus, the invisible target object was on the top right, bottom left pair, or top left, bottom right pair. It's always either of the two. And then regardless of the attentional load manipulation, subjects were at chance, 50% correct in these two alternative post choice. Okay, and then so that's a sort of consciousness manipulation check, and also conscious CFS is relatively reliable, so they believe this thing. And then the secondary, the reaction time. So when the target appears at the center, they press the button and as fast as possible. And under the low load, regardless of the color, if it's T detection, then it's 580 milliseconds. Under the high load, Z black or white, N, it's much slower, 640 milliseconds. So this again, behaviorally ensures that subjects were paying attention to the central task in this condition, but they didn't need to pay attention to the central, or at least there were 660 milliseconds of attention-free kind of period during this consecutive fMRI experiment. Now, the upshot of this experiment is of course fMRI response, and here they localize the neural response within V1 It's called a retinotopic mapping technique. And then they looked at the brain response, neural response only at the location of these 4 patches. Okay, and then what they found was that compared to this, standard, scrambled location, the intact object location produces stronger response, and stronger, especially when the attention is more available to spread to this invisible object. Okay, so this is the measure of the neural activity. This is a conscious experience. This is an attentional check. Okay, what they found was the neural activity to the invisible stimulus increased when the attention is more available to spill over. Okay, but when the attention is confined at the center, they couldn't, and the evoked response by the invisible object was much smaller. So just to recap, what does this mean? It means that under the CFS, first participants could not tell the difference in the object location, either this or that. So they didn't see it, only saw that Mendelian patterns. And then attention load was manipulated tightly by the central task, and then they confirmed it by the reaction time. Okay, and then V1 activity, that's a neuronal measure, is higher under the low load condition. So that means that attentional amplification of the signal happened on the things that they do not see consciously. So again, this is another instance of the attention without consciousness. So just to recap, under the low load, special attention may have spilled over the invisible stimuli, enhancing neural activity. Okay, but here, important thing to notice is that attention was not sufficient for visibility. So what does this mean? Okay, now we are going to come to a summary of this old literature. But before going there, just briefly, this evidence for attention without consciousness is quite large, in fact. And here's the list of the things up to like 2013, and it's all further growing, in fact. And we reviewed this, Kentridge's the first paper, and then Bahrami's study, fMRI study, and so Rothkirch today. But in fact, I talked about Montezer-Kozari's result using this crowding stimulus, these things, and adaptation experiment. And there, what Montezer-Kozari found was that the adaptation, unconscious, adaptation induced by the crowding, requires attentional amplification. So that's also one, example of the attention without consciousness. And Rothkirch, the Kaunitz here, is also similar, motion based adaptation. When it's complex type of the motion after effect, even though you suppress it and then you see the effect, you need to pay attention to the invisible thing to get the after effects. So that's the growing evidence for this attention without consciousness. So about the attention without consciousness, there is a growing evidence, and now we are seeing more and more. And just to recap, inspired by initial blindsight findings and now mostly established. And however, you need to stop and think about whether it makes sense conceptually and also philosophically. Some philosophers seems to still have some problem, or at least revise or revisit some of the assumptions of all these experiments. In fact, you need to think, what does it mean to attend to something that is not consciously experienced? Is the mode of attention completely different or not? And to do that sort of the conceptual exercise, we'll revisit models of the relationship between attention and the consciousness, introduced in week 8. So first of all, Victor Lame reviewed some of the claim that makes serial architecture of attention and consciousness. here, the class C is the sort of summary of the class A and B, making the claim that whatever stimulus input is first filtered by both attention and consciousness, and only attended one gets reported here. Okay, and then another one is that the first you see things consciously or not, and then only those what you see can be attended or not. And then what you attend in the end becomes consciously reported. But both of them seems, at least insufficient to explain some of the finding that I showed, right? Because what we found was that this unattended component of the things, it's not really consciously reported. So in that sense, it's not super inconsistent. But nature of the unattended stimulus is not considered here. It's just stopped there. And here is the more problematic assumptions that only consciously experiencing can be attended. That seems unlikely to be true, because here this unconscious invisible things can be also attended, but there is no pathway for this unconscious attention here. So one way to revise this type of the thinking is to have an following revised serial model. First, things gets either attended or unattended, and then among the attended ones, subset goes to conscious and the subset remains unconscious. Okay, then the other non-serial model proposes something like this. That is that whatever the input comes, it's either focally attended and then becomes consciously reported or not. And here, attention equal consciousness, and that also seems to be inconsistent, because what you're attending is in fact not sufficient for consciousness. So there are subsets. I don't know whether Victor intended this part is the unconsciously remaining unconscious but attended kind of things, but something like that, attended but not sufficiently strong enough or whatever to become conscious is not described in this diagram. And then finally, this dissociation model is the more intuitive or directly correspond, consistent with the finding. Here is that the focus of attention can operate on both conscious and unconscious processing. And this is a part that we are talking about, right? Attention does not really guarantee that you become conscious of the stimulus. However, the neuronal activity or behavior can get improved or emphasized. So that's one consistent conceptual model of attention and consciousness. So in sum, what I tried to say was that the attentional amplification can occur independent of the consciousness. And then that poses the next question. Does amplification of the neural activity explain what we consciously experience? So this may require a bit of the stopping for your thinking. Typically, many people assume that the stronger activity, sustained activity, or whatever happening in the brain is sufficient, and also what we experience. But is it really the case? That's the question. So if it turns out that attentional amplification amplifies many signals really sufficient degree, but does not guarantee conscious experience, it can mean that attentional amplification or amplification of a neural activity is not sufficient for conscious experience. And one possibility to think about this type of the framework is that stronger neural activity is necessary for a report. And that seems much more reasonable, because in the end, when you try to report by a button press above a report, it needs to reach to some motor area or executive area. And then that one gets reported through, behavior, right? And however, if you introspect yourself, whatever you experience, not all of them are going to be reported. So what you see, what you tend to see as an enhanced or amplified activity may be corresponding to what you can report about it, but not really related to what you are experiencing. And this distinction between experience and report is going to be something that we will discuss for the next 2 weeks as well, final 2 weeks. And then finally, neural mechanisms for attention and consciousness are unlikely to be totally overlapping. At least, this mechanism seems to suggest, for example, through sphere colliculus and Falviner, maybe there is a facilitatory mechanism in operation, which is completely independent of how we consciously experience. And what are they is going to be the next question. So the question before the next video is that even if attentional amplification is not sufficient for consciousness, is it still necessary? Okay. So this necessity and sufficiency kind of condition is a bit complicated, but what it means is that whatever you can consciously experience, it must somehow amplified by attention. That's the question. If it's not, then is there any evidence to suggest that attentional amplification is not necessary for consciousness? That's the question next, and we'll review some of the evidence.